So in this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and cover kind of the transition of going from Rhino into Twinmotion and starting to add materials in Twinmotion. Um, before I get started, before I jump into this though, I do want to kind of sidestep and let everyone know that Twinmotion has a really, really great database of online tutorials. What I'm going to be covering in these tutorials is just the bare basic, the foundation of like how to get started. But Twinmotion is a great program that has all sorts of great tools that we're just not going to cover in these tutorials. But if you go onto the Twinmotion website, they have a learning resource. Definitely recommend everyone watch this first 20-minute video, and then there's all sorts of courses. These courses all have YouTube links, and in the YouTube links, there's all sorts of playlists that Twinmotion has already created as well. So there's a lot of great resources out there just to learn more on how to use the software and get really, really good at it. So definitely recommend everyone checking this out. Okay, so let's go back into Rhino. So we have our file. It's set up already. We've broken it, we've exploded it, and we've joined all of the surface, or sorry, Boolean unioned all of the surfaces, and we're ready to get into Twinmotion. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up DataSmith. Okay. Now this should be open if for whatever reason you have it closed. You could go up to your window tab, go up to toolbars, and then click by default. I mean, this is probably what it'll look like is the default setting, but you could click on the pull down and come over to DataSmith. If I click here, I hit close, I now have the DataSmith toolbar. Okay, so there's two ways to connect our Rhino model. There's synchronize, which means that it's going to synchronize our Rhino model with our Twinmotion model. This is the best option, but it does require you to have both Rhino and Twinmotion working on your computer at the same time. It's the best option because it's very easy for you to go back and forth between programs. Oftentimes, as you'll probably see when we get into materials, once we're in Twinmotion, we might realize like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't actually work. So then we have to go into Rhino, make a quick change, edit, then we hit the synchronize button and it'll synchronize with the actual Twinmotion program. And so it's really seamless to work this way. We have the toggle auto sync, and this will automatically sync it. This is kind of it is recommended if you're going back and forth quite a bit, but it does take a little bit more hardware space on the computer and pushes the computer a little bit more than it needs to. And when we're using the rendering, when we're rendering, we're kind of pushing our computers to the max. So I always prefer to just click the synchronize button. Connections. This lets you know which connections you're connecting to, like which software or which file you're being connecting, sorry, which file you're connecting to with Twinmotion. Okay. And then we have export 3D view. This is a situation where I'm working in Rhino, but I'm going to jump over to a different computer. I'm going to jump over to a stronger computer, a better computer that can handle the rendering software. So now we're no longer linking the two softwares, Rhino and Twinmotion, but we're exporting the 3D model, and then we're solely going to work on Twinmotion. Okay. This is the downside of that is if you have to make a change to the actual Rhino model, you're gonna have to go back to the original Rhino model, make the change, re-export it, and then re-import it into Twinmotion. And so that becomes a bit cumbersome. So that's what we're doing. Okay, but we're going to be working just on synchronize. So what I want to do is just go ahead and click on synchronize. Okay, and then we're going to go over to Epic Games. So this is what you'll see. And because we've already installed it, we'll just go ahead and click launch. And of course it does it. There we go. Okay, give me 1 minute. Let's share this again. I was starting to freak out. I was thinking that it wasn't going to load up, but it's loading. It's just taking its time. So here we go. Okay. Yeah. Twinmotion comes with some preset templates. Okay. And these templates are really what we mean by templates is kind of lighting qualities and background images and kind of preset qualities, characteristics that help us to kind of render the object that we want to render. So as you can see, some of this is like display tiny plints, basic lighting. Some of it is like something in the beach, Iceland, white studio, day and night skies. In architecture, we're going to be using the architecture day and night skies. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on open, and it's going to take a minute to load up. But now we are in the middle of the desert. That this is normal, okay? Um, and we haven't we haven't linked our Rhino model, which is why we're not seeing anything. Okay. But the first thing I want to actually do is come over here to this little pinwheel, and you're going to want to change your navigation settings to Rhino. Okay. That means that's going to change what does the left button do, what does the right button do, what does the wheel do. It's going to change all of our settings to Rhino's preset settings. So this way, when we're going back and forth, we don't have to kind of relearn the button commands. That can get really annoying. So we're going to set that to Rhino. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is come to the bottom, and we're going to click on import. We're going to hit the plus sign, and we're going to go to direct link. Okay. And it should automatically pick the most recent synchronized file. Okay. So that's my file right there. And that's all we're going to do. We can hit import. I just want to make sure that your collapse category here is set to keep hierarchy. Okay, we have three options, and it really depends. These three options really depend on what you're going to be rendering and for what purpose. Keeping hierarchy keeps everything as kind of three-dimensional objects. When you get into kind of the rendering world, we start to blur the line between 3D model and animation and gaming. And so all of those kind of on the back end on how the computer reads files begins to get a little bit distorted. And so the rendering software tries to maximize its hardware. And so by going to collapse by material, it actually removes all of the three-dimensional product kind of category, the 3D kind of object coding and just kind of creates one large map based on material. It makes it easier for the rendering software, which for like gaming, for example, makes it a lot easier to render. And the same with collapse all. So that's what this collapse category does. But because we're working with 3D models, we're almost always going to select keep hierarchy. Okay. So I'm going to hit import, going to link, and there we have it. Okay. So here I have my model. So I'm going to zoom in. Now the first thing I want to do is actually click on a large object. So don't click on a window. Click on a larger object, and I'm going to hit the letter F on the keyboard, the letter F, so as in Frank. And that's going to reset my camera parameters to kind of go around the object or place the object that we selected as the center focal point for the camera. So now when I orbit around, it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of move around. Before then, Twinmotion kind of doesn't have a reference a reference point for the camera, so it's kind of all over the place. So here I have my object. Okay. Um, So now that we have this in, let's take a minute to explore the actual interface. So let's go ahead and bring this down. So right up here, this here is our navigation panel. Okay, this is going to tell you how to move around Twinmotion. Now, since we've set the pre-settings to Rhino, a lot of it's going to feel very similar to Rhino. The one thing that's going to be different are these commands. Okay, so we can actually I zoom. uh, we can actually move using the keyboard settings. So WASD. Okay, and if we want to move up and down, we could use the letter Q, use the letter E. Okay? The reason why we would do this, I'm going to pull this out. Now, typically we have these buttons over here, and I'll talk about these in a minute. But typically these buttons here will refer to the actual object. But I'm just going to hit the gravity. Oh, never mind. I take that back. Let's go ahead and let's bring this down. Let's see here. So we could also go over here to the right where we have the eyeball here. And we have a pedestrian or a walk mode. So if I click here, so right now we're in drone mode. By default, we come in with the drone mode, and that means that we're kind of flying around like a drone. But if we click on the pedestrian mode, that drops us to the ground, and then that's when these buttons here come in really handy and useful because then we're walking. And we could use the cursor, I'm sorry, the mouse. So I'm left clicking to look around. To kind of move around. So it's more like a video game at this point. And we get this cool sound effect. Anyways, I think it's cool. So, and then from there, we'll go ahead and switch this back to drone mode. And now we're back to the drone mode. Okay. So this is really useful. However, as you can see, it does get in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the navigation panel. You could always bring it back up if you need to by clicking on the eyeball, and right at the bottom here, you click on show navigation. Okay. So let's, oh, let me go ahead and readjust the camera there. Okay. Um, Since I want to adjust, I'm having a hard time right now just looking at the model because the time of day is kind of like a sunset. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about our environment. So let's go into the eyeball here. Okay, and here this kind of sunlight allows us to change the time of day. Okay, so we could adjust the time of day just like that. Okay. We also have the ability to change kind of the speed. How fast do we move around? Um, and we have the ability to take kind of screenshots. Okay, so this is where I kind of come for mostly for the time of day. We talked about the pedestrian mode, and then we have the VR. This is if you have like a VR headset, you could set that up here. And then we have these other tools that allow us to create sections and to give us these orthographic views as well. Okay, so you do have these options over here with the eyeball. This button here allows us to kind of go widescreen, like a full screen, and to hide all of these other panels. So it's just a matter of clicking back and forth. Then we have on the right-hand side, we have our layers. Okay, so if you remember, if I click on these, in Rhino, because we spent the time of putting everything in layers, those layers actually do transfer over in Twinmotion. The downside is that it names each object as a brep, and so it becomes really difficult to know which exact kind of object to click on. But it does make it really easy if we want to, say, turn off all of our windows. Okay, so we can turn objects off based on the layers in which they came in from Rhino. Okay, so we have our layers over here. And then at the bottom, this is kind of like our properties box in Rhino. We're going to start to see more information about the objects that are selected, or once we get into materials, we'll have more options being shown here at the bottom right. At the top, we have this button here, and this button is what we're going to use to begin to kind of create certain renders and certain images. It also allows us to do like animation, things like that. This is the material picker, so this will allow us to pick certain materials. And then we have these tools here, right, which I kind of touched on a little bit. We really don't use these tools simply because these tools are for 3D modeling, right? So like if we wanted to add a makeshift surface or a panel or something on this side, um, we could do that here. If we wanted to rotate, for example, um, if we want to rotate an object or move an object, we could do that here. Um, but since all our modeling has already happened in Rhino, we're really not going to be using any of these tools. By the way, the Control Z, Control Y to undo, redo, those commands do work here in Twinmotion. Finally, on the left-hand side, this is our library. This is where we're going to be doing a lot of our work. This is where we could select materials. We could add plants, trees, grass. We could add objects like cars. We could work with lightings. We could add people. There's our cars. We have the ability to change the background so that it looks like we're not in the middle of the desert, but we're in like mm, in a city or something like that. So we could do that. We could do that as well. So that's the interface. Ooh, last thing. Over here at the bottom left, where it says 40% stats, rendering is extremely demanding on your computer. And so this statistics pop-up lets you know how your computer is running so that if it's running too hot or if you're really pushing the computer, it'll start to light up and it'll start telling you what's that you're kind of maxing out at that point. You never want to redline your computer. You never want any of these numbers to be red. And if it does, at that point, you probably want to save the file, close down, power the computer off, give it a little time to cool, because since we are pushing our computers to the max, we start to heat them up, and heating the hardware is really what wears the hardware down for the long term. And so you need that computer to kind of cool down a bit. And then you start it up, and hopefully, you have enough good hardware that you could finish the project. Okay. Okay. So we have our model here. Yeah. Now, in the previous tutorial, I talked about how Twinmotion will group certain objects by materials. And so what I'm going to start off with is adding glass because the glass is really going to help me to look inside. Um, yeah, it's going to help me to look inside the objects. Um, Now in Rhino, the glass itself or the windows all share the same glass material. Okay, so I'm going to click over here to materials, and the materials are broken up into categories. And I'm going to come over here to glass. Okay, now before I click on anything, I want to come over here and talk about these two buttons. Okay, these two are going to be really important for us. If I click on this pull down, my zoom tools keep getting in the way. Um, If I click on this pull down, we have three options: replace material, apply to object, apply to selection. Okay. Because of the way that we've created our objects in Rhino, where we use the poly surfaces, create poly surfaces, or we union them, the apply to selection really doesn't work for us. So we're going to be toggling back and forth between replace material and apply to object. Applying to object means that we're applying material directly to that one object. When we say replace material, then we're applying the material to the entire model that has that same material. For example, the glass. Okay, so right now it's set to replace material. And I'm going to go to clear glass blue. And I'm going to all I'm doing is left clicking and dragging and then placing the cursor right over the glass and then letting go. Now, notice how it changed all of my windows. Now, all of my windows have glass, right? That's going to be different than, let's check another material. Okay? Let's pick, I don't know, concrete. And I'm just going to pick the first concrete that I have. Um, if we go to replay or apply to object, okay, if I place this concrete over this glass, it just replaced the material on that one object, not the entire group of objects that had that same material. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. I'm gonna go and replace this back, put this back there. Okay. Um, Next, so we have the glass in. Look how quickly our model starts to shape up like and start looking like a building. Okay, let's go at the bottom here. We could click on materials. And from here, you'll notice that we already have some materials. These materials are actually came in from Rhino. So for example, if we zoom in here, you could actually see that my staircase came in with some materials. Right? You'll notice that that bluish gray that I had on the outside, that is in the that material is shown on the inside or in this model. I'm not quite sure which material I have here, but clearly some material, whatever. Oh, I think that's like a roofing material that maybe came in from Rhino. Anyways, all of these materials came in from Rhino for whatever reason. We can hit this sweep button and this will clean up any materials that actually do not exist in the model. Okay. But from here, we could go ahead and just start clicking and playing around with the materials library. So when I was modeling this, I had talked about this being possibly brick. Okay. So let's look at the brick. And you can see we have different options for brick. Okay. I actually really like this dirty brick. Um, let's pick this one. So I'm going to go ahead and click, drag, and place it over. Okay. Let's go ahead and bring this down. All right, so here's the material that came in. So obviously it's brick, but it's not in the correct direction, right? It's not in the direction we want. But if we come to the right, now you'll see that we have our material options. Okay, when I click on material, you'll see that the material is selected. If I was to click over here, then it's going to begin to change the materials, or the material options are going to apply to the material that's selected here. So I'm going to click on this brick, and on the right, we'll kind of go down the line. We could change the color or the tint. I'm not going to touch this part yet. We can talk about that maybe once we get into the inside and we start doing the flooring. Um, but I do recommend that you kind of spend a little time and just play around with all of these settings to get a good understanding um, of what you do. The nice thing is that if I make, let's say I bring this all the way up or I start tinkering with it, okay, just to see what it does. It kind of does. I could kind of see what it does there, right? There's the difference. I could also hit Control Z, and that's going to undo the percentage so that I could bring it back to the original percentage that it was at. So in other words, you can't break the software just by playing with these materials. Okay. And the nice thing too is that if for whatever reason you don't like it, well, all you have to do is come back over here to these default ones and reapply it. Okay, so if I came in over here and reapplied it here to this one, you'll notice that now I have a second dirty brick material. So anytime we grab a material from the library over here on the left-hand side and drop it in here, we're now overriding the material that was once there. Okay? So that means if I really mess this up, mess the settings up, then all I have to do is drag and drop a new one, and that's the one that's shown. So now we could click here and we could delete this one. Okay, so if we come up here under the UV stands for UV mapping, we can move and rotate this, right? And we could also specify a dimension or an angle. So I could highlight this, type in 90, enter, and now we've rotated it to the correct angle. I could also change the scale, okay? And at this point, it's all visual. So we're just kind of what looks right. So maybe somewhere around there. I think that's about right. That looks good. Um, we could go and play around with all of these kind of options, right? If we go into details, we sometimes play with the UV details depending on how much time you want to put into this. But the UV details, oops, there we go. So this is to stretch. I'm not sure if you could see. Let me exaggerate that, right? That's stretching the material in the X direction. Let's undo that. Stretch the material in the Y direction. So you have that kind of control. Offset X and Y will move the image. So if we want to move the image up or down, we can move the image up or down that way, right? Speed X and Y, this really only applies to animation. So like if you're going to do a fly through animation and if you wanted something to be moving, then um, then we would apply that. But just so you could see, this makes the brick move. So if we were doing an animation, obviously it doesn't make sense for brick, but if we had a material that is moving, then that's why we would play with that. Okay. So in a nutshell, that's how you apply materials to Twinmotion. As you can see, because we already did all the heavy lifting in Rhino, it's pretty simple to just drag and it's pretty simple as just dragging and dropping in Rhino. I'm sorry, in Enscape. Okay. But I still want to go ahead and kind of explore a couple other options. So let's say there's a material we like, but we forgot what it is. So for example, this bluish gray or this greenish gray color, right? If I want to make it add it to all of my exterior walls on the second floor, I could come over here, but I can't really tell which is which, right? So what I can do is use the eyedropper here. So I could click here, click on the material, and the material is going to highlight. So now that I have it selected, I can click and drag and place it right there. And now these materials are selected. And maybe I want to do the same thing over here. So I'm going to click and drag right there. Okay. And how about, what do we do next? The brick. Okay. So this little floor right there. So here's the brick. I'm going to click and drag and place it right there. Okay. Now we did talk about, right, there's that little, what was it, a quarter of an inch? That right there, right? Because we brought the flooring down a quarter of an inch. But I said, let's just leave it. Let's see what that looks like. From far away, we can't even tell. So good thing that we just kind of left it as is. Now, what about the sills, right? We talked quite about, I mean, we spent so much time with the sills. So here, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag and watch what happens there. It applied the same material, but because it's a completely different direction, um, it just kind of applied it in a really weird way, right? And at a very different scale. So that doesn't really work. We have to rotate that. Now, if we rotate this, notice what happens to everything else. Everything else begins to rotate. So now that it's probably correct here, now the walls aren't correct. I'm going to undo that, Control Z. Okay. So whenever we grab, drag and drop a material from down here, it's going to um, keep that property. And whenever we make a change to this one material, it's going to make that change to every material that's in our object. So in a situation like this, what I'll end up doing is I could come back over here to the library and find that same material and drag and drop. I could also click on these three buttons and duplicate that material. So now I have a duplicate material. This is really good if we had changed the color, or if we had made any big changes to, say, the roughness, or if we did change the color. Sorry, I just said that. If we changed any other property, right? And we want to keep that same property, we just wanted to change the rotation, then that's a good thing to just duplicate because it's going to duplicate all of those other pre-made changes that we've made. Whereas if we come over here to the library, it's starting from the default one. So we'd have to make the changes to the color, make the changes to all of the or make those pre kind of set changes as well. So what I'm going to do here is click, drag, and place it right there, right? Now, when I rotate this, I'm only rotating that portion right inside there. So now I could go ahead and get it to the correct angle, but it's clearly way too small. So let's make this a lot bigger, right? And this is going to be somewhat of a challenge. Let's see if we can get in here a bit more. And what I'm really kind of looking for is these concrete lines or the lines in between the brick. I want to try to get them to the correct size. And now this is going to take some kind of playing around. Now it's not going to get exact, but I think we're kind of close, right? I think that's lining up. That's lining up. I think it needs to go a little bit bigger. So when I get relatively close, then I'll go ahead and just change the scale manually. So from 0.64, let's go up to 0.67. I think that kind of works. Well, no, we could also change the offset, right? So like we can change the offset on the Y and bring this up so that they line up exactly. So now that's lining up, but it still feels like it needs to get a little bit bigger. So let's go to 68. Oh, I have to hit enter for the change. And then if I move the Y, I mean, we're kind of close there. But from far away, I mean, it's close enough, I think. This is what takes rendering. This is what takes so much time in rendering is all of these little details, right? So I'm going to leave it like this. You could, once you get into it, you could kind of play and finagle and mess around and get really detailed with the scale. But since I have this now, right, we have this material here on the inside, which is this brick, to a relatively good scale and to the correct angle, I can now apply this material everywhere else, right, on that inside seam. So I could apply it here, right there, right there. And again, all I'm doing is clicking and I'm dragging. Now over here, I could do the other thing where I click on the material dropper, select that material, and just apply that there, there. And again, clicking and dragging. So as you can see, it's a lot easier, a lot faster because we did all that heavy lifting in Rhino. Okay, so we have all our materials. Okay. Now, let's talk about, let's say I want to change this color. Well, let's say I want to add a new color. At this point, I actually prefer using these ones that came in from Rhino. But if you don't have a color, we could always go to the materials. I prefer using concrete and just using like a base context material. Or you could do like bare concrete, which is kind of resembles plaster or kind of a stucco, um, which gives it a little bit more of a thickness or kind of a texture to the material. But let's go with base. And I'm going to click and drag and place it right there. And now I have base context. I'm going to click inside here and rename this, and let's call this fascia. I think I'm going to go with the gray. So let's fascia gray. Okay. I'll click here, and then I'm going to come over here to color and change the tint. And here, I'm probably going to want there, but maybe a little bit more on the bluish green side. There we go. And somewhere there. I'll hit OK, and I'm going to go ahead and apply that over here as well. Okay, now let's get into some problems. So as you can see, applying materials is pretty simple and seamless. Okay, but occasionally we do run into some issues, and we're going to run into an issue here with the roofs. Okay, because again, the projection mapping, I mean, you saw how difficult it was just with the inside here. And that's that this is kind of a rectangular square flat surface. And so the UV mapping, the mapping of the images over the brick material, should be fairly simple, right? But even that took a while. So things get a little bit more complicated once we start working with angles, okay? So I'm going to go over to roof coverings, okay? Now, what I find interesting, sometimes certain materials will work great, other times certain materials will not. So for example, if I click on this roof covering and I place it right there, that looks great. If I take this material, uh, actually, let's go with the metal. That does not look great. That looks really wavy. Okay. Now, depending on the situation, let's go ahead and change the scale. Sorry, that's going to bother me for a while. Depending on the situation, it it doesn't matter. We can leave it as is because it's really not going to get seen much, right? Like from here, no one's really going to see the roof, especially if we're using the pedestrian mode. And maybe it's just, once we see it, if we ever do something like it's coming in at a farther away angle before we kind of get down into the ground. So sometimes it doesn't matter, right? But if it does, we can sometimes make the change in Rhino by rebuilding the structure. Okay. So I'm going to go back into Rhino. If I could find it. There we go. Okay. So I'm back in Rhino. I can take this surface, and what I'm going to do is type in rebuild. And what this is going to do, if you remember in the very beginning, or at the very beginning of some of the Rhino tutorials, we cover how a surface is created, and we talk about NURBs, and we talk about polysurfaces. When we rebuild, we are essentially adding more vertices, more line work, more poly surfaces to the actual surface. So I typed rebuild. It's asking me to select the curve, extrusion, or surface. I'm going to click on this surface. I'm going to hit enter. And here you could see, right, if we change this number to 10, you could see how it simplifies it. Now, in most cases, we actually want to simplify it. We don't need a whole lot, especially for something like this that's not that complex. We don't need a whole lot of kind of complexity to the surface. But the more kind of vertices, the more points that we have to work with, that Twinmotion has to work with, sometimes that material gets cleans itself up. So I'm going to change this to 20. Okay. And that's adding a lot more vertices for Twinmotion to work with. So then I'll hit OK. Now we just made a change to our Rhino model. And if we want that to reflect in our Twinmotion model, we have to hit synchronize again. I'm going to hit synchronize. And then I'm going to go back to my Twinmotion. And would you look at that? The material cleaned itself up. Okay. So if I apply that same material over here, I'm probably going to have to do the same thing. Yep. So I'm gonna have to go back into Rhino to make that change. So let's go back really quickly. I also want to show you this synchronize. Let's talk about the synchronize button for a minute too. Um, that I think I just closed out on. Let's bring that up. Oh no, there it is. So the synchronize button doesn't just work with, so I'm rebuilding this, sorry. 2020, okay. There we go. We could always go in and make any changes. If you still want to continue to model, we could do that too. So if I want to create something here, right, and say, you know what, I want to put a planter box or a grill, something like that. If I hit synchronize, it's going to synchronize whatever changes I've made into Twinmotion. And now I have that, okay? Um, so that's kind of how that works. Now, it didn't really work. It made it a little bit better, right? I'm okay. I could live with this. Um, it's not, it's kind of bad, isn't it? Well, it's not too bad. It'll work. Um, but I could probably go back and maybe rebuild it to maybe 30 or 40. Um, change the U's and the V's to 30 to 40, but I'm just gonna leave it as is. Okay. What I do want to do is change, sorry, before we move on, using that synchronize button in Rhino is great because we, as you saw, we can make changes in Rhino. Um, hit that synchronize and it'll show up in Twinmotion. Okay. So with this roofing material, I could change the color. I was thinking more of a darker color. So let's move this like a dark metallic, hit okay. I probably want to change the scale a little bit, something like that. Okay. Now, if I apply this over here, we're going to run into that same problem that we ran over here, right? I need to rotate this, but by rotating this panel, it's rotating that as well. So let's undo, Control Z again, and I'm just going to duplicate. Now, this is another situation where I would duplicate instead of bringing a material over here. If I bring this material in, it's going to come in this metallic color, but I just changed the color to a black. So if I bring this in there, then I'm gonna have to change that black again. And to get it to match the same exact black is gonna be more work than I want to do. So let's go ahead and, oh, let's Control Z. I'm going to duplicate this and then I'm going to drag and drop right there. And now when I rotate this, let's go 90, enter. There we go. It rotated without affecting the other ones. So probably gonna use the same one here. And then for this one, we'll use that. Right? And there we go. So now you see that we have the roofing material. Okay? And with just a couple clicks and drags and drops, we got a pretty decent um, rendering, right? Or um, materials on this building. Okay. Let's take a minute and work on the inside. Now this becomes a little bit tricky for some, just because we have to get inside here, and that becomes kind of difficult to maneuver. I mean, it's difficult in Rhino. It's actually more difficult in Twinmotion. So luckily we have everything in layers, and the layers we could turn on and off the same way we would in Rhino. So that means I could turn off my roof. Uh-oh. And I forgot to move my roofing materials into my roofing layer. So let's go into Rhino. Let's go back into Rhino really quickly. I could get there. Okay. So I'm going to need to select that, select this, and I'm going to put that in my roof layer. And then I will hit synchronize. And then I'm going to go back to Twinmotion. Now, whenever, especially when it comes to layers, we actually have to turn the layer back on and then turn it off. There we go. So now with the roof turned off, I could come inside here and begin to play around with materials on the inside. So let's say you want wood, you could drag and drop the wood right there. Okay. And we can change the rotation, change the scale. We could play around with the color. Now, when it comes to the color, let's talk about that for a minute. Let me get in a bit closer. Actually, let's go downstairs. I think that's going to work better downstairs. So let's, just because we get in a bit closer and we can see it a bit better here. I'm going to go ahead and bring in, there's this like chevron. There we go. Um, let's change the scale to something that feels better. So something maybe something like that. Okay. And this feels like it should be running in the other direction for some reason. Okay. When we change the color, this gets tricky. So this is an ash wood, and it already by nature kind of comes in as a darker material. Okay. When we change the tint, what we're doing is we're not changing the actual color itself, but it's kind of like staining the wood or staining the material from its existing color. So right now it looks pretty dark, even though the color picker here is light. So I can move this and lighten it. But you'll see that it's actually, even though it's in the whites, it's changing the color kind of more to the blues and the greens. Okay. And that's because it's reacting to the original color of the the material, right? It's essentially reacting. Remember, these are all pictures. These are all JPEG files. So it's kind of like taking it into Photoshop and just playing with the color from the existing color that existed in that image. So you have to be careful that like that's why it's coming out in this way. So we really want to like if you really want to change the color with some of these materials, we kind of we're kind of limited to what we can change, right? Um, However, you could also, one of the things that I have found with these is if we come down here, where is it? Um, oh, details. So we can play with like the saturation, okay? And sometimes that helps to lighten the material. We can change with the luminosity. And so that darkens and that kind of lightens the material a bit as well. So there are other options besides the tint that you can play with. You just have to hit this details button. Okay. So you could do that as well. But now we have material here on the ground floor, up here. We can add, let's see, we have tile. This becomes dangerous. Um, I don't know. Don't judge me on my tile selection. That's a really bad color. That's a really bad tile, but maybe we could get a nicer color. I don't know. You get the point. You could add the materials. I could spend a whole lot of time just trying to fit the right color. Okay. All right. We're almost done. Let's talk about, you notice how this is moving around? Okay. So this material, which material is this? This is a custom material. Let's start off by giving this material. This is like, give it like a wood trim. Um, or maybe we just give it a color. Let's just give it a color. And let's go, see now I got to figure out which color I want. Um, Go to concrete. Let's go with bare concrete. Now this one, I want to apply it to all of my door frames. So whereas before we were applying everything to the object, I want to replace material on this one. So I'm going to click here and place it right. Did I get it right? Nope. Let's go. Let's zoom in. Right there. Okay. And I'm going to change the color to definitely not in the pinks. Maybe the browns to kind of mimic a wood. Something like that. I don't know. Whatever. It's still flickering. Okay. With certain objects, especially the smaller objects, I've found that if we come all the way to the bottom, all the way to the bottom to the miscellaneous, we have the option to select two-sided. Okay, and this is going to apply the material to all sides of the object. And once we do that, you see what happens there? That seems to have fixed that problem. So now we have sorry. Now we've now it's no longer kind of shimmering. So if you have any issues with the material with it kind of like shimmering, or if it's not really showing entirely, come down and select the two-sided. That always seems to kind of work for me. Um, and then I think that's it. If we wanted to, we didn't add a material to, oh, one thing, got it. I knew that there was one thing I was forgetting. Let's go to, let's add the window frame. Right now it's like a black, but what if, so under metals, you can see we have all sorts of metals to choose from. And remember, we could always change the color. But if I want, let's say a brushed steel. We could go with the nanodize. Okay. You'll notice that in some materials, this is what I wanted to cover, that some materials have this arrow. And that means that it is actually not in, it hasn't, that material has not been downloaded in Twinmotion. There are some materials that are in the Twinmotion library that we don't have, that Twinmotion did not install just because it wanted to save room on your computer, right? But if there is a material that you like, the symbol here means that it needs to be downloaded. So all we have to do, all we're going to do is click on it and place it. Maybe we have to hit the down arrow. Sorry, take that back. We have to click on the down arrow and download it. And so you saw the little pause button. It downloaded. Once it's downloaded, we could click, drag, and apply. It's going to take a minute right there to create that object. Did I apply it to? I'm not sure if I added it. It did, but I don't like it. Well, whatever. What about this one here? Doesn't really seem, and I want to make sure that it's applying to, yep, that's correct. I mean, it is applying the material. I do see it shimmering, but anyways, what about this one? Anyways, you see, I can spend all day. This is dangerous. Um, let's go ahead and bring the roof back, and there you have it. I mean, within just a few minutes, we were able to apply the materials. But again, I do want to note that we were able to apply these materials because we spent the time um, in Rhino preparing the file pretty quickly. I mean, preparing the file to transfer over. So that's why, you want to spend that time in Rhino to prepare it properly. Okay. So that's how you add the materials. Hope you have a lot of fun with it. One last thing before I forget, most important thing, save your work. So once you have it, we're going to go up to File and we're going to hit Save As. Okay, Save As, and then find the file location as to where you want to save it, and then save your work. Okay, because if you want to come back the next day and continue working on this Twinmotion file or make more changes, we can go ahead and do that as well. But if we just close it out right now, we're going to lose all the work. So make sure you go up to File, Save As, save your work where you know you're going to be able to find it in the future. Okay? Good luck, everyone.